dear Father God, as I kneel before you today. Oh, Jah, oh, Jah, this is my prayer to my Father up above. Good evening, everyone. This is my prayer to my Father. Good evening, Grand Rising. Good night, wherever you are around the world. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Marie's Message 411 TV. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I hope everyone is having a peaceful evening this evening. I welcome you. I appreciate you. The joy of your salvation, create in me a clean heart, O Jah. You are my rock and my fortress. Let me never be put to shame, O Jah. You are my help and my deliverer, my deliverer. Deliver me in your righteousness. Let your kindness and truth preserve me, O Jah. Set me free, set me free. This is my prayer to my Father up above. This is my prayer to my Father up above. Forgive me today. Forgive me, I pray. Forgive me today, my Father up above. Welcome, 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 everyone. This is Marie's Message 411 TV. Good evening, good night, wherever you are around the world, welcome. Tonight, I am coming to you to bring awareness to incest, molestation that happens in Jamaican families, in Jamaica, and all over the world. I am one of the victims of molestation and incest. This video is dedicated to SoFlo TV. And I want to tell my story because recently I watched a show by SoFlo TV, and Queen Ifrica was featured on his show, and she spoke in detail about her story of molestation and incest by her own father, by her stepfather. And so I bring awareness to this. I call it a sickness. Where do I start? As you watch this video, try and do your calculations as to what age I was when these things started to happen to me. I have to go back many years when I first migrated to the United States. I am originally from Jamaica. I am a born Jamaican. My mother is Jamaican. My father is Jamaican. They are no longer alive. I have sisters from another father that I grew up with. My father is not my sister's father. I am the oldest daughter of my mother, and she had 4 daughters after me. I am now 51 years old. I migrated from Jamaica, from Meepen, Clarendon, Jamaica, in 1983. When I came to the United States, I lived in Ohio with my mother and my 4 sisters in a 2-bedroom house. I have other aunties by my mother's side, my mother's sisters, that I don't know, who moved away to England when I was a child. And there was only one sister that my mother had that lived in Ohio. And so my mother migrated from Jamaica to Ohio. She started working as a nursing assistant at a nursing home. She filed for me and my sisters to migrate to the United States to be with her. As a child growing up, before I came to the United States, this was 1983. Before I came to the United States, my mother often told me and my sisters a story about us having a brother who we did not know, who we did not grow with. When I was born, I was being raised with my mother as an only child. I did not know my brother. My brother is 10 years older than I am. After I was born, 2 years later, my mother had twin daughters. 2 years after that, she had another child, another girl child. 2 years after that, she had another girl child. So altogether, she had 5 girls. All of us grew together. We did not know our brother. His father is not the same father as my father. The story that my mother told me about my brother from the time I was a child was that her mother was sick, who is my grandmother on my mother's side. I never knew my grandmother and my grandfather on my mother's side. They died before I was born. And my mother told me that I had a brother and that her mother was sick and she had to take care of her sick mother. So she took her son, who was her only child at the time, to his father and left him with his father. This was in Jamaica. She left him with his father with the intentions to come back and get him after she cared for her mother. Her mother ended up dying. After her mother died, she went to go and get her son from his father and his father's side of the family, which is my brother. She told me when she went to go get my brother, the family stoned her, ran her away, and refused to give her her son. 10 years after she had my brother, she had me. All I knew was my mother for 2 years until my sisters were born. After she had all 5 of us girls, she migrated to the United States and was living in Ohio near my aunt, who was also living in Ohio. When I came to the United States in 1983, my mother and my sisters and my auntie and her children was all that I knew. My mother would work the night shift at the nursing home. She told us about our brother and that he was coming to the United States. So my mother helped my brother to come to the United States, file papers for him to come to the United States. And he was living with me and my 4 sisters in the 2-bedroom house with my mom. While my mom worked at night, he would watch us and take care of us girls while she worked at night. My brother used to do things that I did not understand. When we would get ready for bed, he would give us hugs, and he would, as the oldest girl, he would ask me to hug him and kiss him. As a little girl, I did not know any better. I'm thinking, this is my brother. He's putting us to bed every night. We get hugs from him. I kiss him. I say goodnight. Fast forward. We moved from that house to another house in the same neighborhood. But this time, there's 3 bedrooms on the 3rd floor and 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. My mother has 1 room on the 2nd floor. My brother has a room next to my mother. On the 3rd floor, I have my own room because I'm the oldest girl. The twins girls share a room, and then the 2 younger ones share a room. One night after we had a house party, back in the 80s, house parties was very popular. And Jamaicans, my mother was living in an area where there was a lot of Jamaicans in the area, and she was well known for her cooking and having parties. She could cook very well, she could bake very well, and her and my aunt would put on parties for their friends. And sometimes the house parties was at my mother's house, and sometimes the house parties was at my auntie's house. For us little girls, that was fun for us because we were able to stay up at night instead of having to go to bed. My mother and aunt was so busy entertaining their friends, their Jamaican friends, that they didn't really pay attention to what us children were doing. This particular time, the party was at my aunt's house. And I've always been the type that I loved dancing, I loved singing, I loved to entertain everyone. I was the life of the party from I was a little child. I even remember what I had on that night we had the party at my aunt's house. I had on some white dress shoes with the buckle over the top of my foot. I loved those little white dress shoes. I had on light blue pants, and I had on a light blue shirt with looks like a t-shirt with a design on the front almost like a rainbow. And I remember dancing all night that night and enjoying myself. And after we came home from from the party at my aunt's house, I went upstairs to my room, got undressed, and went into my bed. And my brother came upstairs into my room, got on top of me in the dark, put his hands over my mouth, and began to take my underwear off and penetrating me. I begged him to stop, and he refused. I said, put on a condom. He refused. He said, nothing is going to happen. At this time, my mother is downstairs. We had just come home from a party. Everybody had been drinking. All the adults had been drinking white rum and partying. That night, my brother took my virginity. I was 15 years old when I gave birth to my brother's child. So do the calculations as to how old my brother was at the time, how old I was at the time when I got pregnant. Remember, my brother is 10 years older than I am. And I gave birth to my first child at 15 years old. And that child is my brother's child. When I confronted my brother and told him that I was going to tell my mother what he did to me, my brother said to me, what do you think she's going to do about it? She's too busy trying to make up for the years that she was not in my life. That's what my brother told me when I told him that I was going to tell my mother. I tried to hide my pregnancy until I couldn't hide it anymore from my mother and my sisters. And when my mother realized that I was pregnant, she took me to a facility to have an abortion. And they told her that I was too far along and I could not have an abortion. My mother used to take out her anger on me that she had towards her son. She would take it out on me. My mother used to beat me with electrical cords, try to choke me to death. I ended up being the blame for what my brother did to me. And yes, after she found out what my brother did, she never put him out of the house. He continued to live in the house. I went to school. I was in the 9th grade. I was pregnant in the 9th grade. I went through my 9th grade of high school, pregnant as a teenager. Everybody whispering and talking about me. Remember, this was by this time I had come to the United States in 1983. My son was born 1988. I was just going to the 9th grade. I was ashamed. I used to be so afraid to go home after school. I felt so ashamed and so alone. I went to church with my big belly, and none of the church members or the pastor tried to do anything about what was going on. My mother brushed it under the rug and told me not to tell anybody what happened. And she continued to have my brother living in the house. It became a situation where I was like my brother's woman, his girlfriend, his woman. My brother, from the time he took my virginity until I was 17 years old, when my brother finally stopped having sex with me. I remember one time after my son was born, his child, after my son was born, he was upstairs in my room with me. He was a little baby, couple months old. I think he was barely walking or crawling. And he came upstairs to my room and wanted sex from me. And when I refused to have sex with my brother, he took my son, his child, held him upside down by one leg, and hung him out of the 3rd floor window and said, "If you don't have sex with me, I'm going to drop him." If I was in the basement doing laundry, he would come in the basement and attack me and have sex with me. He would take me to the park and have sex with me up against a tree in the park. And all this time, he had a girlfriend. My mother knew what was going on. His bedroom was right next to my mother. It wasn't until I was 17 years old when he tried to get sex from me in my mother's house, and I looked at him and said, you have to go kill me in this house today, because me nah give you nothing, you nah touch me again. You have to go kill me, because you nah touch me again. Me nah allow you to touch me again. And I succumb, me get the man to stop having sex with me and stop touching me. After my son was born, I went through postpartum depression. Postpartum depression is when you go into a depression and you don't want to have nothing to do with the child. Just the sight of the child makes you sick. I couldn't breastfeed. The first time I tried to breastfeed my son, I wanted to vomit. The fact that he was touching my breast, it reminded me of my brother touching me. Every time I looked at my child, it reminded me of my brother, because he looked just like my brother. He had everything of my brother. After my mother took me to the abortion clinic and they said that I couldn't have an abortion, she told me that when I have that baby, to leave the baby at the hospital when she come to pick me up from the hospital, I could not bring that baby home to her home. That's what she told me. And I believed her. And when I got ready to leave the hospital, at 15 years old, I'm giving birth. After I got ready to leave the hospital and my mother came to pick me up, I got dressed, but I didn't dress the baby. I left the baby because I had intentions to leave the baby at the hospital. All of this happened in Ohio, in America. And my mother looked at me when I told her that I was getting ready to go. And she said, "Where are you going without the baby?" I said, "You told me that I could not bring this child to your house." And she looked at me and said, "You really think I was going to let you leave this baby at the hospital and then you would hate me for the rest of my life?" And we took the baby home. And my mother took the baby, took my son, and nurtured him and cared for him and sent me back to school and told me to finish school and she will take care of my son. My son bonded with my mother and have a closer relationship with my mother than he did with me. It wasn't until my son was about 12 years old before I started to have feelings of love as a mother towards my son. My son got to an age where he started to do calculations in his own mind and started questioning me about who his father was, because by that time I was married to my second son's father, and my oldest son was calling my second son's father Dad. And one day he did the calculations and realized that his dad that he's been calling daddy all this time is not his biological father. And I had to sit him down and tell him the truth about who his real father is. And until this day, my son hates my brother. And he still calls my first husband Daddy. And that's a whole nother story, because my first husband is also 10 years older than I am, and my mother gave him to me. He took me out of my mother's house at 18 when he realized and found out all the things that I had been going through. But he was a man that was coming to a restaurant that my mother was working as a chef, as a Jamaican chef. She was working at a restaurant. And this American man used to come there all the time and buy Jamaican food. And he would see my son. And he bonded with my son. And my mother introduced this man to me. And that's how I got with my first husband and ended up having my second son. I want to bring awareness to all of the ancestral things that go on in Jamaican families. I want people to understand that it's not just happening in Jamaica. These Jamaican families, wherever they go around the world, they molest their family members. My brother has never said he was sorry for anything that he did to me. For all that I went through, all the shame, all the humiliation. Even the state of Ohio failed me. The statute of limitations, Whoever came up with that, I think it's disgusting. There should never be a statute of limitations when it comes to a child being molested and raped by their own family member. The state of Ohio failed me. The school system failed me. Let me tell you how the state of Ohio failed me. When I got the courage to tell the truth about who my child's father was, because I had to get food stamps. Back in those days, food stamps was those paper food stamps that look like paper dollars. I was getting food stamps for my son, and in order for my mother to get food stamps for my son, we had to reveal who the father of my child is. And there was a DNA test that was done by the state of Ohio, proving that my brother is the father of my child. And my brother ended up having to pay me child support for my son. And because he did not want to pay child support, he stopped working to refuse to pay child support. They put a lien on his house. By this time, he was married to a second woman. His first woman was his girlfriend, who he had a son with. Then he met another lady who used to come to the house when I was a child and used to say to me how my son looked just like my brother. And she asked me for permission to marry my brother, and I told her it was not a good idea. And she married my brother anyway. Years later, she found out why I didn't think it was a good idea to marry my brother. Because she was married to my brother and they put a lien on the house, and she didn't know why they put a lien on the house. Come to find out, like Jamaicans say, story come to bump. She did her own investigation, and I ended up having to explain to her why they put a lien on her house. So we had to have a meeting. This is an American woman who married my brother. We ended up having a meeting with my mother, my brother, and his wife. And I sat there and explained everything that happened to me and everything that my brother did to me, to this woman, and to my mother. My mother sat there silent. My brother cried the whole time. And the wife is asking him, "What are you crying for?" She's the one that went through the humiliation in the 9th grade of high school, being pregnant. What are you crying for? And I explained to her, I said, "Remember when you asked me if you should marry my brother and I told you no? Remember all those times you used to come over and say my son looked just like him? Well, now you understand why he looks just like him, because that's his child. And the reason why they put a lien on your house, ma'am, is because he's trying to avoid paying child support, because there was a DNA test that proves that he was the father of my child and he's supposed to pay child support." When I sat there at the table and asked my mother why she did not protect me as her daughter, and she allowed this man to come into her home and molest her daughter and let it go on for so long, my mother explained to me, this is what my mother said to me. She said in her own words, "The two of uno come from the same womb. How could I choose?" So my brother was right all along. She was trying to make up to him for all the years that she was not in his life. His father and his father's side of the family turned his mind against my mother all those years because she left him with them to take care of her mother. And he grew to resent her. And when he came to the United States to get revenge on my mother, he did what he did to me to get revenge on her. She pampered and babied. My son was my mother's favorite grandchild. Out of all of the grandchildren, my mother favored my son the most. Why? Because my son looks just like her son. My son was an opportunity to relive and give my son everything that she wanted to give her son that she could not give her son. So she took over my son and treated him like he belonged to her.